In today's episode, we're going to be talking about starting and growing your business. And my guest today is Paul Kirch from Boss Academy. So, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm used to being on the other side of the interview, so this is kind of fun. So,
I've been interviewing a lot of podcasters recently, and they're great people to talk to. They definitely know how to talk. So, thank you for coming on.
thanks. Yeah, well, hopefully I don't disappoint you.
I don't think you will. So, let's get into your story because I
Sure.
think you have a very interesting story, and I think my audience will relate with it a lot.
Yeah. Well, if we talk about entrepreneurial journeys, I took a long time to get where I am today. I've had my own company for 6 years, but I spent 21 years in corporate America wanting to own my own business. And, I was so married to a paycheck, and I started really focusing on, okay, how can I become entrepreneurial? How can I start a business? And every time I went down that path, I just kept pulling myself back. And it's like, oh, that's paycheck. And the more I grew, the more I developed, the more I started to make money in my career, the more I realized that, this may never happen. And so I actually was part of a startup back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We had a small startup that never really went very far. And it was enough that made me scared of the idea of really doing it full time. But I thought, okay, well, if I'm not going to start my own business, but I want to be entrepreneurial, what can I do? So I decided sales was the best avenue. I could be entrepreneurial. I could kind of own my own book of business. I could control things. And I thought that's what I would do. And so I moved into sales. And then I became a salesperson, started making more money. I became a sales leader, started making even more money. And the more money I made, the more I felt I will never own my own company. And it ate me up inside because I knew it was my path. But see, I didn't grow up with mentors and people that could really help me find the way. I didn't grow up around anybody who was really entrepreneurial. I grew up in a really small town. And so what I was achieving, I kind of felt guilty not appreciating it. But I didn't really appreciate working for someone else. I wanted to control my own fate. And I kept getting these great job offers. I was in the marketing research industry for about 21 years, and I got offered this job to come in as a sales leader for a company in Dallas, and I was living in Seattle at the time. Kind of long story short, but I moved to Dallas because of Hurricane Katrina. Just long story short, Hurricane Katrina had flooded the city of New Orleans the day I was supposed to take a job with a company in New Orleans. So anyway, long story short, I ended up in Dallas at one point and took this job on as a sales leader. And the next thing you know, we are just killing it. We're having a blast. And I'm waking up every day excited about what I do. I married the girl who ran operations. I'm running sales. She's running operations. We're having a lot of fun. And one day the owner comes to us and says, good news, I'm selling the company. And I thought, that doesn't sound like good news to me. But I saw it as an opportunity. I thought, okay, you know what? Maybe this is going to be good. Well, the company that bought us was European. They were in France. I don't know if it's characteristic of a lot of French companies, but this firm micromanaged everything we did day one. They took a culture that we loved and transformed it into something that I grew to really dislike. Sunday nights, my wife would be in tears because we had to go in the next day. And these are two people that woke up excited about our jobs.
Mm.
And it went to the point where we didn't even like what we did, didn't like the company. And so I decided I had to leave. And I left, negotiated on my contract, got several job offers, kept turning them down. And my wife looks at me and she goes, I appreciate it that you haven't taken any of these offers because you're not happy with any of them, but you got to do something. You either need to start your own company like you've been talking about for years, or you need to take one of these jobs. And at that point, when I knew I had her blessing, because she was a very risk-averse person, and I thought, if she's behind it, maybe now is the right time. And so she kind of was the person who pushed me off the ledge a little bit, and I needed that little nudge.
Hmm.
But once I started going, I just became like intoxicated by the idea of running my own company. I had clients day one, which was nice, but I really didn't know what I was doing in terms of total direction. I knew I was going to take my sales leadership experience and really help some of these companies that didn't have a good sales presence and help them become more successful. So I started really work on a plan, and I decided I'm going to build a sales consulting agency And I started partnering with some other people to provide some lead generation services and started to expand those services. So 6 years later, here I am still running that company and having a blast with it. But I vowed that I wanted to help those people who felt like I did. And so I created this concept last year called Boss Academy. BossAcademy.com. It started off as a live radio show out of Dallas called Boss Academy Radio. And I hosted it there for about 8 months before moving it to a podcast. And the podcast is a means of connecting me with amazing people like yourself, Travis, and making these connections that allow me to make the information I provide not one-dimensional, because I don't want it all to be about Paul Kirch.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be about other experts. So I started to build this expert network, and I started to expand upon what we did there. So the show is really now a driver for getting people to Boss Academy, but once they're at Boss Academy, I want it to be more of a resource for the entrepreneurs, because our tagline is BOSS stands for Business Ownership Success Strategies. We want to be the last boss you'll ever need. So if you're an entrepreneur or somebody wanting to become an entrepreneur, we want to be that resource for you. So that's my journey. That's where I am today, and just having a blast with it.
I love it. So let me ask you the obvious question, and that is,
Yeah.
if you could go back to your 20-year-old self or early 20s-year-old self, what would you tell yourself, and what would you do differently?
Well, I recently interviewed somebody who was fairly young as an entrepreneur. They started their own business when they were 17, and they were still in their late 20s and had a lot of success. And he said, look, he goes, I have a lot of respect for people who start businesses later in life. My wife was 8 months pregnant when I negotiated out of my contract. I started my company in 2009. The economy was in the toilet, so I took a lot of risk.
Yeah.
But for me, at the point where I was, the time was right. I didn't have an alternative. Tony Robbins always talks about burn the boats when you get to the island, so there's no way to escape. And I kind of burned the boats, and that's really what I focus on. But if I could go back in time, I would have really gotten serious about recognizing that it's easier to take the risk when you're a little younger. I would have surrounded myself with other entrepreneurs. I would have become a better networker. I didn't do any networking in my 20s. I became an amazing networker in my 30s. I worked for a company that said, hey, we want you to go to some networking events, and we want to get you to go to these conferences. I started realizing that meeting other professionals and connecting was such a great way of expanding my horizons. So I would have probably done a lot more really networking and trying to build a network of people that could support me on that journey, because I knew even then that that's what I wanted to do. I just didn't know how to do it.
Let's talk a little bit about networking, because I think for a lot of the people, especially young people out there, networking is kind of this dirty word where it's like, oh, you're going to try to make some surface level connections with people, but I don't see that way at all, especially after podcast movement where you meet all these like-minded individuals. So can you talk about networking and potentially how to do it properly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say to those people that really have a negative perspective on networking, or they feel like, that they're doing something that's out of their comfort zone, put that aside. That's all a bunch of BS. And really, I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for networking. I worked for the Gallup organization for 10 years, a great company, but they never sent us to any events. In fact, they kind of sheltered us from knowing that the rest of the research industry existed. And I don't know if it was all by design, but there was always this cultish atmosphere at Gallup. It was an amazing place to work. But that's the one thing they never really explored with us. So when I got the first opportunity to go to a networking event, I was out of my comfort zone. I didn't know anybody, but I had some people approach me that really kind of took me under their wings and made me feel comfortable. I began to volunteer for organizations. I became the president of a chapter of the Marketing Research Association out of the Northwest, and I started to get really involved in volunteering and giving back. The people I've met, the connections I've made, have put me where I am today. And anybody that doesn't see the value in networking, if you think you're just going there to meet some people and hang out and have a good time, great. But what are you going to do with that? And kind of sometimes you feel like a dog chasing a car. What do you do when you actually catch one, right? But if you get to a networking event and you recognize that there's an opportunity to really expand your own horizons and learn from other people and grow, it's a powerful place. So there's some things you can do at networking events, if you don't mind me sharing a couple of
Please.
concepts. But if you don't know anybody at a networking event, find somebody there that's one of the volunteers, one of the supporters of the group. Have them introduce you to some people. Don't be afraid to do that. But at the networking event, the easy thing to do is just have a long conversation with a couple of people, right? We've all done it. We've gone there, and it's comfortable. Somebody's talking to us, telling us their story, and we spend a half hour talking to them. And we're in this room full of these other people, but because it's more comfortable, we don't expand and go out and talk to a bunch of people. So I had somebody give me some great advice years ago. It's like, try and limit those conversations. So I try and have 5 to 7 minute conversations with somebody, and I'll say, look, I'm here to meet some other people, as I know you are, but I really want to continue this conversation, especially if you see value in that relationship. Get their card and say, can we schedule time right now? Do you have your phone on you?
Mhm.
You know, people carry their phones with them. They can schedule right then and there. If somebody says, well, why don't you call me when you get back? Great, but write it down, make note of it, and then call them. Don't try and have every conversation at the event, because the problem is, if I meet you at the event, like when we met at Podcast Movement, you were busy, and you're talking to a bunch of people over those 2 days. You're going to sessions. It's all great, but when you get back, are you going to remember everything I said? Wouldn't it be better if I get on your calendar and you become a captive audience? So anybody who doesn't see the value in networking, you're missing one of the greatest opportunities to grow.
I completely agree. Let's jump into starting a business, because that's something I feel like you know
Yeah.
extremely well. I want to start, I could ask you how to properly start a business, but I feel like that would take 20 at 30 hours at least
Yeah.
just to touch the iceberg. But let's talk about some of the mistakes that you see people over and over again making when they're starting their business. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, I think for a lot of people, the biggest mistakes come around a few things. Not having a clear plan,
Okay.
not having clear direction, I think is probably one of the biggest challenges that most people face. I am probably one that was guilty of that at the beginning. I didn't have a clear plan, and I really kind of struggled with direction. But when I sat down and actually built the business plan, I used a software program called StratPad. It's really inexpensive. In fact, I think if you're a student, it's even free. Stratpad.com. A gentleman out of Vancouver, British Columbia, created this program. It's phenomenal, and anybody can create a really compelling business plan with this. So having a good plan is great, but you don't need a 70, 80-page document to start a business. You need some clarity on your direction, how are you going to fund it, who are you going to serve, and things like that. So I'd say having a clear plan was one of the things that was my biggest mistake, not having that in the beginning. Being underfunded, depending on the type of business. I bootstrapped my business. I fortunately had a career that allowed me to put some money aside to start my business. With a wife 8 months pregnant, what choice did I have, right? I didn't go out and get another funding. I didn't do that. But if you are going to go get funding, you need to have your ducks in a row with the plan and make sure you've got something that's really scalable. But if you're going to bootstrap it, or if you're going to go into it and make sure that you understand that you're not going to probably be able to pay yourself for a while, that was a reality that I was willing to face. I knew that there was going to be a period of time I wouldn't write myself a paycheck, and I was okay with that. In fact, it was about 12 months, but I could have paid myself earlier, but I was able to not do that. Now, a lot of people aren't in that situation, so you need to take that in consideration. And the other thing I would say is, don't wait. You know what? The problem we face as human beings, and you've probably had this happen, I've had it happen, I guarantee anybody listening's had it happen. You get an idea in your head, you fall in love with that idea, you get excited about it, you don't take action, what happens?
You
You
move
start to
on,
lose,
or whatever. Yeah, you lose interest.
yeah, you lose a desire, and it's like you start to go, well, that was a great idea, but it's not going to work. You talk yourself out of things. Take some action right then and there. Start moving forward. Grab a pen and paper, start making notes. And the other thing I will tell you, the biggest mistake people make is don't share too much with your friends and family until you really are committed to the direction. They will talk you out of it, even if they don't mean to. Even if they mean the best for you, they're going to shoot your dreams down. It's just the way it is.
I have so much to say on all the kinds of different things you just said, but I'll talk about the last one. When I was going to leave my job and I had this idea for the dance clothing business that I'm currently doing, all my coworkers, which are the worst in my opinion when you're looking to quit, they'll shoot down everything. But they constantly were like, "Well, what if this happens? And what if this happens?" And finally I
Yeah.
told them, I'm like, "Look, it's a business. It can't be perfect right now. It's like trying to, drive to New York. It's like I don't know everything that's going to happen. I can't plan for, oh, I got to avoid, this highway and go over here, but I know a general idea of where I am, where I want to go, somewhat of a plan. It's like you figure it out on the way kind of thing."
Yeah, and I think that's so powerful. And coworkers, people. Okay, this is an interesting perspective about being an entrepreneur, and nobody shared this with me. But we've all heard the entrepreneur is the loneliest job in the world. I didn't get that concept. Now, I worked from home for 4 years in sales roles. I was traveling a lot, but I understood isolation. But as an entrepreneur, it's a little different, and I think you can probably relate to this because even if you have employees, the employees can't understand the stresses, the challenges. They're not the ones staying up at night. They're not the ones working the weekends. And the average person doesn't get it. So you mentioned coworkers. Well, anybody that's collecting a paycheck, a steady paycheck, or works in a kind of environment like that, entrepreneurship seems relatable. But until you actually do it, you don't realize the sacrifices you have to make and the fact that most people you talk to can't relate.
Hmm.
Your friends, your family, unless they happen to be entrepreneurs or business owners, you can have conversations with them about what you do, and you're going to get a lot. Oh yeah, that's cool.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, wow, that's really neat. But they don't understand what you're going through, so it does become lonely and isolating, and that's partly why Boss Academy exists because I also want to provide a community for the entrepreneur to be able to come and share and hold each other accountable and network and things like that. So yeah, a missed opportunity for myself was to really not take advantage of surrounding myself with other entrepreneurs my first couple years. I just was doing it on my own.
Yeah.
But now I've got mastermind groups I belong to and I partner with other people because you need to find people that can understand what you're going through. Can you relate to that?
Absolutely. Let's talk about ways to do that. Obviously, Boss Academy sounds like a great way to do it. What are some
Yeah.
other ways that you found that are it's good to be able to surround yourself with other like-minded people?
Yeah, well, I had somebody tell me about this concept of a personal board of directors when I was actually working as an employee. And I started to think about this idea of starting this business. I'd kind of gone out and I was already working on it. I had two clients, but I didn't really have what I would call a structured business at the point. And I said, you know what? I do need to get some help. So I reached out to a few people that I knew, a couple CEOs. One guy was a salesperson, another person marketing person, and I built like my own little what I called a personal board of directors. I had like about 7 people, and they were people I would bounce ideas off of, and that was a phenomenal way to get that started. I let that kind of fade away because I was so busy building the business. I shouldn't have.
Mm.
And when I said I circled back and I really started to create a network of entrepreneurs that I partner with and work with, that was when it was a really good turning point. So I would say find people that can help support you along the way. Now, you need to be very clear with what you expect from them. And if you're listening to this, go, well, I can't afford to pay these people. I didn't have to pay anybody
Hmm.
because they want to see you succeed. Especially if people, I said a lot of employees can't relate, but you get somebody who's a CEO, you get somebody who's um, runs their own business or is a consultant, they're going to understand and they want to support you along the way.
Yeah.
So that's one way to do it.
Let's talk about that really quickly. So the personal board of directors, I assume it wasn't anything formal, like you meet once a month and have conversations.
I had some formal structure around it with some of them, and I didn't do it with a couple of them just because of their schedules. And I had I had said, okay, well, we're gonna meet, we're gonna talk on the phone once a month, and then I'll shoot you some questions, and we'll come up with some things that you want me to work on, and just keep that communication flowing. So once a month doesn't seem like much, but when you're talking about 7 people, it ended up being quite a bit of correspondence. But I found that that was enough to keep them engaged in what I was doing and vested in my success. and it also was enough that I felt like I had good sounding boards. You need some form of accountability, and if you've got somebody that is along the same entrepreneurial path as you, I've got an accountability partner. We created this concept. We met at a conference a few years ago, and we came up with the idea of just holding each other accountable. We have a weekly call. We talk for an hour on the phone, talk about his business and my business. There's not a lot of formal structure to it, but we use each other as sounding boards, and it's invaluable.
With the meetings you were talking about before with the like personal board of directors, would it be like an hour-long conversation, or how would it go?
It really depended. Normally, I told them I would try and keep it half hour or less.
Okay.
But you get somebody that's really very giving and sharing and knowledgeable. Sometimes those conversations would go on for an hour or more. It really just depended on. I tried to be as respectful of their time as possible. Look, they were donating time, so I didn't want to be presumptive, and I wanted to keep it short and be respectful. So 30 minutes is what I would commit to, but sometimes it went longer.
Okay, absolutely.
So.
And one of the first things you were talking about earlier was a plan and creating a plan. Do you have any tips around how to create a plan? Obviously, you talked about that software, or
Yeah.
is there anything else?
Stratpad.com. Yeah, Stratpad walks you through the whole process. I think that when it comes to planning, getting fixated on the numbers initially is a problem because it's overwhelming. I mean, sometimes you have to, right? I mean, you need to know how much you're going to spend here and there. That's all great stuff, but you kind of have to know the strategy for where you're going. Who are you going to be serving? We've all probably heard the term avatar, or some sort of description of the potential buyer, your ultimate buyer. I didn't really appreciate that exercise in the beginning. Now I love that exercise. I want to define who I'm selling to, who is my ideal audience, and I want to know what they look like. I want to know what they drive. I want to know what the kind of challenges they face every day. And it can be very daunting to do that. But if you can define an avatar, define a clear direction on your plan, from there you can start to work on the numbers and pull that stuff together. But I'd say that's a good starting point, is just really know where you're going with the business. What's the strategy? Now, that brings up a great point. You can talk about strategy, you can talk about tactics, and a lot of times people confuse those two. They don't understand the difference. But the strategy is the bigger picture view. Where are you going? What kind of clients are you going to serve? And the tactics are the steps you have to take to get there. What kind of elements are you going to need in your business? What kind of software? What kind of training? All of that.
Awesome. So this is a lot of tips, and obviously it's not comprehensive for starting a business. But let's assume by this point someone has a business and they're going along, it's going well. Do you have any recommendations for growing the business? And let's talk about mistakes you see people make often with growing their business.
Yeah, well, because I'm a sales guy and I've done sales training, sales leadership, and I actually have my consulting agency, Active Sales Intelligence. I'm a big believer in selling strategies and not being afraid to go out and ask for the business. I'd say that that's one of the biggest challenges a lot of people face. I know so many people that get into entrepreneurship because they've got a great idea. They know their business. They've got the experience. They need to run it. But the one thing they lack is sales experience. Now, you mentioned people struggling with the idea of networking. Well, networking and sales kind of go hand in hand. You can't be, in my opinion, a good salesperson if you don't understand the value of networking. That's maybe debatable and arguable, but I'd say that maybe the biggest challenge is asking for the business in a way that isn't pushy and isn't aggressive. The old idea of always be closing, I'm not saying you don't ask for the business. You do. But always be closing was a concept that just has alienated so many people in the modern day because we have so much access to information now, right? I mean, information's a commodity. You can go out and ask Google anything and get almost any answer you want. Asking the right questions is the challenge. So I would say that one thing that I would tell people they want to get better is if you're starting a business, you're on the path, you know what you want to do, think about the objections you're going to face first. Okay, so the objections are the things that you're going to tell me. It's like, well, I'm happy with the people I already work with. I've already got somebody who provides me with my dance clothing. I'm already happy. Okay, how are you going to address that? And if you don't know how to address that, often you're answering on the fly, you're answering in the moment. Your answer is going to change from time to time. You're never going to have the opportunity to really control that situation. Pricing, timing. These are the kind of objections you're going to face. There are not going to be a million objections. Now, if I said to you, it's like, how many objections you face in your business and you haven't ever thought about it, you might think there's a lot. But if you start breaking it down, if you have more than 5, if you have more than 10, I'm going to be shocked because there's just not that many objections. And most people don't take the time to sit down and figure out, how am I going to address that when I'm having a conversation with somebody and they tell me, it's like, you know what, your pricing's too high. You're right, my pricing is higher. It's higher than my competitors, but here's why.
I like it.
And you need to know how you're going to contend with that. And if you can address those things proactively before they ever come up, that even puts you in a better position. And I'm sure in your business you've had to face those things. So I'd say that that's a big part of it, is just really understanding what are the objections you're going to face and how are you going to go up against those. And then get better at asking questions and learning to listen. It's not about convincing somebody to buy your stuff. Jeffrey Gitomer, who has he wrote the little bit Red Book of Selling, the Sales Bible, is a really great thought leader in the sales space. He has a saying that he says, people hate to be sold, but they love to buy. And I've heard it used in multiple ways. But that phrase in itself really speaks volumes, because if you're being sold to, you feel kind of slimy. You walk into a car dealership. How many times has anybody bought a car and they walk in feeling like they got shortchanged? Even if they paid $5 for that car, they feel like the dealership got the best of them. If it's an experience where you walk away feeling like that was awesome, that's the difference. And you want to create that experience. So I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
That absolutely
I could talk about this topic for hours, but to be honest with you, ask better questions, learn to listen, know the objections you face, and fall in love with what you're doing. You know, and if you don't love what you're doing, you can't expect them to love what you're selling.
Let's dive in just a little bit on that. And it depends on every industry, but let's use my business as an example. So you saying it's best to do, are we talking about like cold calling, going in person, email, or any of those?
It doesn't matter. All this applies no matter what you're doing. I mean, if you're emailing somebody, I'm still a believer in face-to-face if you can. The telephone is your next best sales tool next to face-to-face. We've fallen into the trap of thinking email is the only way to correspond with people in business. And I will tell you that, yes, email can be effective. Email allows you to reach a lot of people. It's all great. But email is the easiest form of sales to avoid, and messaging in general. I had somebody tell me once, like, well, you know, young people today don't want to be called. Fair enough. They don't want to be called. I get that. You know why? Because they want to be able to avoid your sales message. And so you can send them that email. It doesn't mean it's going to get through. People don't follow up enough. I think it's the National Sales Foundation had done a study that they looked at how frequently people were outreaching and at what point were people buying. They found that 80% of all sales take place between the 5th and 12th outreach. That's phone, email, whatever. Most salespeople, statistically, 3 or 4 outreaches and they move on. That's salespeople.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs, good luck. Most of them are not going to do more than a couple because they get frustrated with the process. They think, well, you know what? No one's answering the phone. I'm not going to make the calls. I'm not going to leave a voicemail. No one answers voicemail. You know what? Here's the dirty little secret about voicemail. It's the best top-of-mind awareness tool out there, because if I leave you a voicemail, Travis, what has to happen? You have to dial in and listen to it. Or even if you get the transcribed message in your email, you have to look at it. So you may not see or hear my whole message. You might hear, hey, this is Paul Kirch with Active Sales Intelligence. That in itself may be enough the next time we talk or connect for you to go, I know this guy from somewhere. And I'll give an example. I was at an event in New York City, and I'm talking to this guy, and he's standing there. He looks at my name tag, and he goes, oh, I know you. How do I know your name? And I said, well, you know, I've got this business podcast show, and I do some art writing, and I'm out there a lot. You've probably seen it from that. Well, I knew that I'd actually called him and left a couple of voicemail messages recently, and he was trying to piece it together where he knew me. But in his mind at that point, there was some credibility behind my name because he knew me, and he couldn't piece it. We had a great conversation. We were connected when I got back. And I'll give another example of how voicemail is often underutilized or underrepresented by most people. Another person at that same event, I saw him and he says, Paul, he goes, I owe you an apology. I haven't called you back. He goes, but I still have your voicemail on my phone, and I'm leaving it there as a reminder to call you when I have time.
I like it.
Now, when people tell me that voicemail doesn't work, okay, but I'm going to get the business when they're busy sending their emails and moving on to the next opportunity because that person hasn't reached out to them. So that's one of the things I would tell you, that consistency and follow-up, and don't be afraid to ask for the business. I mean, all these things, it just, like I said, would go on for hours about this.
Absolutely. I want to wrap up here because I feel like there's so much knowledge already that I don't want to overburden the listeners with more. But one question I always ask at the end, and I think you're going to probably have a pretty good answer to this, is if you could tell something, go back in time, tell your 20-year-old self, or just general advice for people in their 20s, the listeners, what would you tell them?
Corporate America is never going to protect you. I mean, the idea of working for a company for 40, 50 years, whatever you end up, they used to do, pensions don't exist. Entrepreneurship is tough. You're taking risks and challenges. But I would tell myself that if you want to have the future you want to have, look at entrepreneurship. Because if you think a company is going to protect you, I have so many friends that have lost their jobs, lost more than their jobs because they didn't have a fallback plan. Even if you don't feel like you could go do this on your own and start your company full time, find something that allows you to create some money on the side. So that's what I would definitely focus on.
Great advice, Paul. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, I would tell them to go out to bossacademy.com. Check out bossacademy.com. If you want, you can email me directly at info@bossacademy.com. I'd love to hear from you, and if you want to discuss anything related to this topic, I'd be more than happy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter, and I release a new video every Monday, and by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.